Hi, everybody. It's Nannette, and I'm super, super excited to have my guest today with you guys. She is a leadership and power guide, a spiritual teacher, and a best-selling author who recently released a book called Who is in Charge of Your Brain? Rachel Alexandria, thank you so much for being here. Please tell us a little bit about you, your book, your work, and what brought you to where you are
Wow, those are three awesome questions.
now.
I'm super glad to be here. I'm so glad that we decided to do this.
Yes.
A little bit about me. I've been an entrepreneur for over 10 years.
Amazing.
Started in 2006 while I was still in school becoming a therapist. And around the same time, Spirit came a knocking at my door and was like, "Hello, you're an energy healer." And I was like, "What? Ah, yes, no, oh my God." So, and boy, I'll tell you, nothing changed my life more than the entrepreneurial journey, and I'm sure you get it, and most
Oh,
people
yeah.
listening to this will get that. Uh, so so yeah, I stayed on that track to become a therapist, which I did, and was doing that work at the same time as trying to figure out how to weave in being an energy healer, intuitive person, because all I ever cared about was bringing transformational change to
Hmm.
people. So those do actually work really well together. It just is, there's not really much of a model for it, and there especially
Right.
wasn't
You
10
kind of
years.
had to forge your own path a little bit.
Very, very much. That is like, if you had like a subtitle to my memoir, it would be "Had to Forge Her Own Path,"
I love it. But it's
comma,
so much
stubbornly.
more like, I don't know. I've had to do that a few times. I had to like step in and basically create something I didn't have any reference for. Um, but I find that that creation is so aligned and divine because you don't have any like influences from others, where you're just really speaking from and creating from a really divine expression like
Yeah.
space. So I love that. So then after being a therapist and recognizing that you have energy healing capabilities, how did you end up in your work now? And tell us about your work now.
So I call myself now a leadership and power guide. That definition took like a year to sort of wrangle into. I was like, am I a coach? Am I am I a
Mhm.
consultant? What am I doing? Um,
I'm sure people can relate. And by
I'm
people,
sure
I
they
mean me.
can. Like, it's hard when there's not a good definition, but you want people to be able to be clear enough in a
Mhm.
short amount of time. I still have to try and explain to people what I do, and because what I do, actually you're the person who has best most quickly explained what I do when you said you had that post stream about tell me what you do without telling me what you do,
Oh,
basically.
yes, that's right. I do
And
remember
then let
your
me see if I
response to
can
that.
guess your title. And, and I said whatever I said. I help people overcome their obstacles to their power, or I help
Mhm.
people make peace with their power is one of the ways I
Yeah.
see what I do. And you said, so you're like a sage and a slayer of all the ways we lie to ourselves about our
Yeah.
power. And I was like, boom, baby, that's amazing.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And I've been on that journey myself. Oh my gosh, the concept of power as a woman um, has been something that I'm currently really moving through and moving into.
Yeah.
And so that's amazing. So you kind of help facilitate that shift, or do you like are they ongoing sessions where people kind of show up
Yeah, so
more and
there's a few
more?
different ways that people can work with me. I mean, I do teach workshops. That's probably going to become a stronger offering over the next few years. For a long time, people would say, "Oh, you should teach groups," and I'm like, "Oh, teach them what? I don't know. I mean, yes, I'm a good teacher, but what? I don't know."
Yeah.
Now I actually have curriculum. I have a workshops, or well, a series called Power Embodied, that's basically all about how to set better boundaries and get clearer confidence through the actions of working through difficult conversations.
That's
Um,
so needed.
Yeah.
It's so, so needed right now.
Yeah. And that was actually the byproduct, or not the byproduct, but like the further product of the book that I wrote, which is called Woman Overboard, 6 Ways Women Avoid Conflict and 1 Way to Live Drama Free. So from the book, I started teaching a workshop that used to be called Good Girl Boot Camp.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like kept modifying as I worked with my therapy clients. And now what I have is what I call guidance clients. So people can work with me for 3 or 6 month sort of packages. Like I'm on retainer, basically. I take on a small number of people as an ongoing retainer client basis, which means that we meet at the bare minimum, like 3 times a month, either in person or virtually like this. Plus I'm available on a reasonable expectation of a 24/7 time. So we
Good
do
boundaries.
phone calls, or what's that?
Good boundaries.
Thank
I
you.
learned that lesson myself.
Thank you. Yeah. I remember my supervisor when I was a therapist being kind of nervous about me offering my clients, if stuff comes up, because the work comes up outside of session. And you want to be able to like work it when it's fresh.
Yeah.
Like get into it. Right. And so I'd say you can call me or text me, and if I'm available, I'll give you 15 minutes. That's just kind of rolled into my pricing. And he'd be like, he'd be nervous for me. But the thing is, I don't attract people who are really boundary pushing because I'm so clear on my boundaries. I mostly attract kind of over responsible, extremely independent, kind of lone wolf types who are trying to learn to get help.
Yeah. That's so funny. I went through that shift where I was attracting a lot of people who really needed a ton of my time. And I decided to work on my boundaries consciously, which of course led to working on personal power. And this is all in the last maybe 3 months. So that has been a huge concept in my life. But now, as a confirmation of the work that I've been doing, I just attracted a client maybe 2 weeks ago, and she has been the most low maintenance and amazing client ever because I'm standing strong in my boundaries. And so she knows how to interact with me. So that's really awesome.
Give me 5.
Yeah. And boundaries is a really hard thing for me for a long time. So I'm really glad that your work is really focused on this. But I want to talk about your book.
Okay.
So Who's in Charge of Your Brain? Can you give us a quick breakdown of what it's about and who it's for?
Oh, well, so Who's in Charge of Your Brain? The question that it asks is what causes anxiety and depression, and what do we do about it? Which sounds like a downer, but it's actually a really fun little illustrated book.
Yeah, I love that.
It's less than a sentence per page usually.
That's awesome.
And it's the kind of book that it's for almost anybody. Like I have pictures of 3-year-olds picking it up because it's so graphic that they'll see it on their parents' table and they'll pick it up and be like, and I mean, kids.
Is the language in there pretty simple too? Like the language that you use in there?
The language, I would say, is something like 3rd or 4th grade. I mean, one of the, I sold a copy to someone at my dance class, her and her daughter. I think her daughter's probably 10 or 11 is my guess. And her daughter loved it and was super excited to read it. And so they took it to her school to see if the teacher was interested. And the teacher looked at it and was kind of like, it's probably kind of old for the kids. Like it has the word vilify in it, but that's probably the most complicated word it has in there. And
I love that.
But she's, they said that it was sitting on her desk and the kids keep walking up and picking it up and looking at it. So, I mean, I'm a firm believer that you learn stuff and your vocabulary increases through reading.
Right.
So I don't think
it's waiting for you to get there and then you learn it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one complicated word in a book is not a big deal to me. So.
Yeah. It's a learning opportunity, right?
But it's definitely
what that means.
It's definitely, I mean, I wrote it for adults. I wrote it to be an easy access way to understand basically what's happening in your head in terms of how you let your inner critics run the show.
That makes sense. The reason I ask about language and basically the simplicity of the book is because I've been realizing just in my own journey that eloquence doesn't equal growth. You know what I mean? And being able to talk about a problem, which you probably encountered this as a therapist a ton. My therapist would be like, okay, Nannette, I get it. You get the problem. And I could talk circles around it. But I'm realizing that the simple, direct delivery is actually maybe more impactful and more just direct. Yeah, it's more direct. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there's a time for eloquence and there's a time for simplicity. I think everything on the spectrum has a time and place. It depends on who you're trying to communicate with and what you need them to get or what you want them to do. What was really cool about writing this book for me was, it was kind of like a download.
Yeah.
I had a client one time being like, why do I keep doing this? And kind of going into this same cycle I'd been seeing with her for over a year. And I was like, I can tell you why. Let me map it out for you. And I explained to her why. Okay, so there's a part of you who wants stuff, and there's another part of you who judges that part for wanting that stuff, saying that stuff's not okay to want. And then this part feels sad, and then another part comes in and is angry. Why can't I want that stuff? And the same part is like, don't be angry. Anger's bad, right? And then this part's like, I shouldn't want things. I'm bad. And then that same critic is like, why are you depressed? Get up. It just sort of goes in this cycle.
Yeah.
And then she get angry and then like want to do stuff and then feel bad about the anger. And I was like, this is what's happening. And she'd be like, oh yeah. Oh, I really see that. And then 2 weeks later come in and be like, why do I do this? What's happening? And I'm like, okay, let me see if I can draw you a picture and like put it someplace that's like really, you can just keep connecting to. And that was the start of this book, was this like a picture similar to this one of like, here's what's happening, dude. When you judge your wants and needs, it will inevitably lead to anger, anxiety, and depression.
Yeah, it's so simple. It's so simple. But also, I know getting to the point where it's simple.
Getting to simplicity takes, it was just like all of a sudden, even though there's stuff I understood, it's sort of like that next trajectory of like the more you learn stuff, when you finally really get it all the way through, then it could finally be simple. And that's how the book started coming out. And I just sat down and drew a bunch of pictures and then kind of got midway and was like, okay, where does it go from here? Like, here's what's happening, but then what? And so it took me a couple of years of sort of chunks of sitting down and like listening.
Yeah.
Like, blah. So it was, felt like a channeling, and not in like some sort of way where I wasn't in control of what I'm doing.
No, I channel all the time and I'm always in control. I don't always remember what I said. That's been a challenge where I'm like channeling and then later I'm like, wait, I said that? And I realized actually about 2-3 years ago, I was drawing and writing a lot. So I was drawing like mandalas and things like that.
Cool.
And I was writing like prose, poetry. And you know how Facebook will tell you, oh, a year ago you posted this, 2 years ago. So it's super hilarious because just this last week, I really like learned like, oh, I don't have to do anything to deserve like abundance. Okay. Like that's a thing. And then I went and looked in that memories thing. And 3 years ago, I wrote a poem about not needing to deserve abundance. And I was like,
hello.
Okay. I guess I already knew this at some level, but it's so funny because like knowing it in a cerebral sense versus knowing it like deep in your body is such a huge difference. And I didn't get it until I got it.
You don't get it till you really get it. And I get to watch clients over time move from a logical understanding into an embodied understanding and how different that is.
That's amazing. Yeah. I didn't even know this was a thing, like the logical versus the embodied, until I started learning things in the embodied way. And I was like, oh, I thought I already knew this. And I remember getting super frustrated with myself, thinking like, I already learned this. I read it in a book. I already learned it. I read this already, you know, like listening to You Are a Badass for like the 8th time. I'm like, I already know this. But then like 2 years later, it's like, for me, that's the, what's it, like gestation period or whatever. It's like 1 to 2 years. But now I'm intentionally like moving that stuff down quicker and quicker every time. So it's not taking 2 years to really get what I'm learning, which is amazing.
Yeah. Well, so it's a great example that you say that, because, you know, you and I have our own sort of timelines and processes for shepherding our own change. A lot of people don't know how to do that. Like, if you aren't called to do that by yourself.
Yeah.
And even still, you don't entirely do it by yourself, and I didn't either. So that's one thing that I do with my clients is I'm helping them walk through that kind of identity level shift.
Yeah.
Of like, I was a person who had these terrible boundaries, and moving into a person who, so here's like a client success story. This year we did some really intentional work, like identifying that she still had a lot of past trauma around men in authority, you know, like a father figure and like an advisor, basically, let's just say. And we did a lot of releasing. We did a lot of working through it. We did a lot of magical stuff. And it's at the point where she actually ran into that advisor at a work conference. And she just walked up and was like, hey, and gave him like a side hug. And she's like, and he was all awkward. And it was, but she was like in her power. And this was someone who, even just the thought of that person in her head used to give her so much anxiety and self-criticism.
That's
and
amazing.
We did that in a few months, you know, where normally that might take 4 or 5 years to like move that adulting process forward if you're doing good work, you know?
It's hard because a lot of us don't realize like how much we could benefit from somebody helping us with these things. It seems so ethereal and like out there, but it's really not. Like, you can see a very real example of how being in your power affects just your everyday life. So the next question I wanted to ask is more into moving like your business forward. So as far as all the things you've done in your, was it over 10 years of entrepreneurship and shifting and learning, what do you think has resulted in like the biggest growth for you? Like the most powerful catalyst? It can obviously be like working with someone, but it could be an event too.
Wow. You know, there's been like if I look back at my trajectory, there's been so many kind of like that marketing journey that's like this, and you're just like, I mean, sure, was it this corner, but then I went this way, and you know, I would say really, if I can offer a couple, really working on my money journey was a huge shift for me, and that's taken a number of years.
Like money mindset stuff, or like okay, cool.
I mean, I've always been good with money on a pragmatic level. When I was married, I managed the money that my spouse made because I was still in school, and that's actually what got us into a better location, because he was good at making it, he was terrible at managing it. So but I was like, I realized at some point a few years ago, even when I had a job, I mean, I've been in grad school a couple times, so my work history is not as sort of, you know, like that as some people's might be in their 20s and 30s. But even when I had a job in my 20s, I never was making great money. That was never my, it was never my goal. And I don't think I'd realized, I wasn't in a job long enough to realize, hey, eventually this just becomes untenable, you know? So, and then I went into entrepreneurship, and due to me having to forge my own path kind of thing, and I think spirit pushing me in the ways that it does, it's taken a long time to get to a level of financial success. And as I always say to people, when you start a business, it'll bring out all of your emotional stuff.
Yeah.
Is this a show where I can use bad words?
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead.
So I say it brings up all of your shit.
Yeah.
All of your shit. So, yeah, there was a time, I think it was like 2012,
Mhm.
where I called it my year of money and love. And I just went and did everything that was like workshop-y and like listening to stuff and reading stuff about money. And I thought, oh, a year. Yeah. No, it didn't take just a year. But that was my intense focus on that. I think,
For sure.
learning about being in a debt economy was really transformative for me. Doing, money tapping, like I use tapping, and there's a
I
whole,
love EFT. Like, so
yeah,
much.
there's a whole
I tell
particular
all my clients to
system
do it.
that's that uses the chakras and
Oh,
money
very cool.
stories. Yeah, so it's a whole program that I've used a few times. It's been really helpful. I did Mark Silver's Heart of Business Foundations course at a time where actually I knew a lot of stuff, but at that point I actually used it to unlearn a lot of
Mhm.
bad things I had learned along the way.
Yeah, you bring up a great point actually. There's a lot of information out there. And it can obviously be overwhelming, but it's also all not for you, right? It's not
Yeah.
all for your particular business, for your particular,
Style.
phase of business even. Like it could be for you later, but it doesn't need to be for you now.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like one of the things that I love helping people with is like, you don't need all this stuff. Like you just need to first of all, unlearn some beliefs about how people work and how money works and how like all of that stuff. So we go into like abundance consciousness is a huge part of what I've been integrating more and more as I feel comfortable.
Yeah.
But also understanding that simple is a lot of times better than doing too many things at an inefficient, level,
I
right? Because when
still
you're
try to
dropping
learn
the
that one.
ball all the time, you're like, okay, I'm going to live stream every day and it's going to be awesome. But then you're like tired on day 3 and then it feels like a failure, right? When you miss a day or something like that. And then if that wasn't enough, you also attach a story to it. I always do this. Oh my gosh, like I never can figure out this marketing, and it spirals out into this giant mess when
Right.
really you set yourself up to fail. And I think even setting yourself up to fail is a self-sabotaging pattern, because I do believe that we know it's not going to work when we decide to do it.
Mm.
We have an understanding that we're going to be overwhelmed by it. And so we like try to muscle through it and like try to change our habits from the outside in with pressure,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to addressing, like starting from a simple place and then expanding outward
Right.
as you feel the shift to do that. Because I'm not saying stay comfortable all the time either. I'm just
Well, let's
saying,
just tell your audience right now,
mhm.
you can muscle through things for a short amount of time. You can never, ever muscle through a long-term plan.
That's a great simple way to say what I was meaning. Yeah, it is. Like if it's something that's temporary and you need to like work up the courage to do it, that's one thing. But if you're
Mhm.
like creating this whole marketing strategy, if you even do that, but if you're creating a whole marketing strategy and it's built on these things that are very draining for you, you are setting yourself up to drop the ball and then fail.
Absolutely.
And then it, like I said, it spirals. So that's
Right.
really interesting. And then in regards to just marketing yourself as
Mhm.
like a conscious energy healer, all in the magic, how like what have been some of the challenges and the aha moments that you've run into,
Yeah.
especially like direct remarks from clients? We get those a lot. They're like, how can
Uh,
I charge for this? Whatever. So can you share just some like of
yeah.
the big aha moments, but also some of the challenges you had with
Sure.
setting rates and things like that?
Yeah, sure. Rates has never been a particularly hard topic for me. I
Mhm.
was fortunate to, and maybe that's because of boundaries. Like numbers are easier to define. And I also worked some with this great woman named Michael Ann Valterra,
Mm-hmm.
who ran a company called the Women's Under-Earning Institute. I think her company name is different now. So Michael Ann,
That's a great name though. I love that.
isn't it? Yeah, it's very memorable, and she's a very memorable person. She's great, really high integrity, and I brought her in. This will give you a sense of my journey. I was just finishing therapy school. It was 1 year into entrepreneurship. I hadn't been doing therapy while I was getting my degree. I was like doing writing coaching, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the very first time I spent an hour with somebody and they handed me $100 because that was what I charged. And like then walking away and being like, I just made $100 in an hour. Oh my God,
Yeah.
Which of course, if you like lay out all the hours long term,
that lead up to that moment.
yeah. I mean, at that time it didn't take me a ton of time, but of course making that sustainable, like, oh my God. So I'm 1 year out of entrepreneurship. I was just finishing my therapy degree and I was looking around at business and all the stuff I'd been learning. And I was like, I'm an extrovert and I'm a super fast learner. My colleagues aren't going to get this. Like, it's going to take them forever. And they're all supposed to like launch therapy practices. I need to like put together a workshop. So I brought all these people together and I did this like 2-day workshop with guest speakers thing at this really nice retreat location. Getting people there was super, like the marketing was the hard piece. Partly because I really thought that I thought, first of all, here's a fun story. I thought I would tell my classmates and they would recognize the benefit and be like, oh my God, totally need this. That's amazing. Mm-hmm. I got 0 of my class of 40 at that workshop. People who actually knew me and whatever. And I remember telling them about it a few different times and like getting really upset. This is like early days of business brings up all your emotional shit. Mm-hmm. But I was crying to my professor. I was just like falling apart. And this is back in a time where I didn't have as easy of a time stepping into my vulnerability. So for me to be crying to my professor was like a big mess.
Yeah.
Now I'd be like, meh, but 10 years ago, yeah. And I was like, I just feel they don't respect me and they don't like it. And she was like, honestly, I mean, this is the first I've heard about it. And I'm like, you've literally been in the room when I talked about it. And she's like, I feel like this is the first I've heard about it. I don't think that this is a they don't like you problem. I think this is a marketing problem. And I went, oh. It was like the first time of like, people aren't rejecting me.
Yeah.
Don't get it. They haven't heard it. Like that was, so that's probably one of my first ahas of like how much you have to say shit to people before they actually hear you.
Yeah. They talk about like the rule of 7 or the law of 7 in marketing, that people have to have 7 exposures to really maximize conversion, meaning that they buy whatever you're talking about. And it's so funny because like it puts people who haven't worked through the worth and respect aspect of putting themselves out there, it brings all that up.
Yeah.
If you're someone who hasn't worked through that and you have to talk about your work so much, it makes you feel egocentric. It makes you feel like, arrogant, whatever. But when you shift that, and this is the part of my work that I love to do, when you shift that and you see the deep value, right? And you see the ripple of impact and transformation going out and out and out and out.
Right.
People that you're helping, then speaking regularly and often about what you speak about becomes more of a responsibility and one that you value, right? It's almost like when you realize how big this is, like you can't shut up about it. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's how I know I'm in my purpose, because I cannot shut up about this. Right. And a lot of the people that I work with and a lot of people that I will be bringing on, I'm sure, have similar experiences where they realize, or where hopefully they come to realize, that the rejection is not personal. It's normally just an inefficiency within marketing, right? Not having prepared your audience enough, not really understanding that they want this product in the first place, and it's sometimes it's a matter of just repositioning the product or program, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I learned myself. I remember I was talking about like attracting, what did I call them back then? Like ideal clients. And I had this whole philosophy that's really quite magical and awesome, which I now talk about soulmate clients. And it's about like that which
that's so cool.
will never miss me, and that which was never for me can never come to me. And it's that whole concept, but also deeply understanding from their perspective what they need to understand that this solves the problem that they're solving. So for example, someone who is not standing in their power, has a hard time with boundaries and kind of thrown about by anxiety, depression, etc. You normally see all that together, I'm sure. But someone who's there isn't going to respond well to claim your power, right? If they don't realize that that's their problem. If they think that their problem is everybody around me walks all over me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's them, right? They're still at one. You can identify they're still in a victimhood state, and that's okay. They just need to spend their time there and then eventually move out. But also, they aren't resonating with power because they're on like the polar opposite side of it. So if you are going to talk about power, for example, you need to create the gap and say, okay, here's where you are, here's how you get there, and then you can market to them. And this is all part of the marketing, but that's where the content and all of that stuff comes into play. So I definitely resonate with that. And it breaks my heart when I hear those stories though, because I know that rejection is so core. It feels awful to think I put my heart and soul into this. This is what I'm
doing this for you. That's how I felt. I'm like doing it for you. I'm like from my heart, this service for you. And you're just not even getting, it's like handing someone a gift and they just sort of look at it and like walk away like, what? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And it feels like rejection is so deep. And actually I have another client who told me a similar story. I was like, did you talk about it? Like, did you tell anybody that you were launching? Because I'm your friend on Facebook and I didn't even see anything.
Oh, yeah.
And she's like, well, I post about it like once a day. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about how this works. The more you post, the more Facebook actually ranks your stuff. So then you can get into the more technical aspects of marketing, like especially with social media. But if you understand, like if you don't have that understanding, then it feels so raw. And it makes me sad. That's why I talk about this stuff so much, because it's really important.
It's your divine purpose.
Yeah, definitely feel really dialed in, especially now that I've added in a little bit more of the woo. I was really resisting that. And actually, I went a little bit, like in last December, I went a little bit into it, but I still was very reserved. And now I'm like, dude, I'm like magical AF. Like I do rituals. Like I have like from where I'm sitting right now, I see Palo Santo and like 15 crystals. Like there's always, like it's always around me.
Mm-hmm.
And like, this is how I want to show up. And even just yesterday, one of my one-on-one clients was having a tough time with something, and I actually did energy healing. Like
nice.
I sent it and I was like, let's do this. Like, it was kind of like a guided meditation, but I was like directing energy, and it was epic. And I was like, this is it. Like, I'm in my purpose. Like, it feels so good. But before I was like, nobody's going to pay if it's not like ROI centric, Right. So anyway, I've had my own growth there.
But the way I found you, at least as far as I recall, the way that you came onto my radar was you doing the posts with the 3 tarot cards and the stones. And I was like, oh, what's that?
Yeah.
And then I watched you do that. And then I started hearing you talk about marketing. I'm like, okay, same gal. Interesting.
Yeah.
But that's what, like, I see. I mean, I have no idea what your full trajectory was, but from my vision, my perspective, I was like, she's brilliant. Bring in people with people like choosing one of 3. Like, that's brilliant. You don't have to do a bunch of work, right? You just choose the cards. You interpret the cards later in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Get everybody engaged. Facebook loves you. And then you get to talk about marketing.
Yeah.
It's just so brilliant.
It was not an accident, because this is exactly what I wanted to happen, but I didn't realize how well it would work when I started to do it. I've done Tarot Tuesday since like June. Every Tuesday. I missed one Tuesday, but I like really couldn't post that day. And it has consistently gotten between 80 and like 120 comments, like every single, it doesn't matter how late in the day I post it either.
Totally. That's so smart.
I've been testing it. So some days I post like at 2 p.m. and I still get over 80 comments. Yeah. Sometimes I post at 9 a.m. and I get about the same. So it doesn't really matter when. But Tarot Tuesday is definitely one of my biggest like moments that's helped shift my visibility and all that a lot.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Your book, how much does it cost?
The book is the book is $19.95. You can get it from my website. If you just go to rachelalexandria.com.
And I'll have that linked with us.
Cool. Mm-hmm. And it's featured on the homepage, but I can give you the direct link to the book page. Eventually I will get it hooked up on Amazon. I haven't gotten around to it. And it's locally, it's at a bookstore called Third Place Press. So
very cool.
Yeah.
That's super cool. Yeah. I actually connected with you via like wisdompreneurs, but I can never make it to a meeting.
We're not even doing that anymore.
Yeah. But it was like a year ago, I think, and maybe more. I was still living in Seattle.
Okay.
And I kept trying to make it and I never did. But it was because downtown Seattle like gave me a lot of anxiety to drive there. So I had to
I totally get it. We were never actually downtown. We were meeting kind of on the outskirts of downtown. But yeah, I get it.
I was coming from the south, so I like felt like
yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on here. We hit some amazing little nuggets of awesomeness. Is there anything you want to leave us with, or any last words? Where can we find more about you? Is your website the best place?
My website's the best place, rachelalexandria.com, or people can find me on Facebook, because I do some of my most active posting there and my live streams. I'm also on YouTube, but make sure it's Rachel Alexandria, IA, and not Alexandra, because that's a horse who won Preakness. And so she's...
Now I'm still nobody will forget that
the horse.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on. And I'm really excited to talk with you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Nannette. It was fun.